Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of The Dialogue, a discussion of making an impact for a better world. This episode is proudly brought to you by our ever growing community, The Collective. I'm Ari, and I'll be your host for today's podcast. Now, in today's podcast episode, we will focus on the importance of addressing climate change, in which we have an invited speaker with us here today, which is Adina Bidin. Hi, Adina. So,
Hello.
so Adina here is an environmental professional in the private sector. Maybe we can hand the floor to Adina to maybe talk more about herself.
Thank you, Ari, and thank you for having me here in this podcast. My name is Adina. I am an environmental professional with 10 years worth of experience in public sector, and I've started my environmental journey with a master's in environmental legislation and management, and here I am today.
Amazing, amazing. As you can see, guys, she's very proficient in this field and also perhaps whatever is going on in that world, and especially the efforts here in Brunei as well. So let's get into the crux of the matter here, Adina. Thank you for explaining yourself, by the way. So why only now do you think that climate change is emphasized?
It's quite an interesting question, right? I feel like there's a lot more facts that has been shared across, and there's a lot more voices. And of course, there's a lot of focus now with Paris Agreement, and a lot more youths are actually involved in the whole movement. But I also think that it's time for our environment to get the attention.
Exactly. And I've also been there on the ground, observing that there's a lot of actions for the environment here in Brunei. Especially now, it's very in frequent amounts, I would say. But what's the difference now compared to before? Why is it not emphasized before as seriously?
Um, this is my personal opinion, and some other people might have different opinions about this. One thing I noticed the difference between environment and safety, for example, is that for safety, it's easy to actually feel and relate to the consequences,
Ah,
because obviously it's
okay.
about a person or somebody close to you or even yourself, right? And
Exactly.
consequences of safety, it's kind of like easy to measure and feel. For the
Mm,
environment, it's gradual and it's not really
mm,
dramatic. At least like over time, it takes time to reveal all the impacts to the environment,
yeah.
compared to that. And I feel like some people um, can't relate to what's happening to the environment and how it's impacting them, because
Mm.
it's not direct.
Yeah, and that's an interesting note at the end there. It's because people don't really take it seriously unless it's directly impacting them in some manner. I think that's what I can excerpt from what you said. Correct?
But of course, like
Yeah,
that's more of an opinion of people who are like myself, who are, I'm very fortunate to be living in Brunei,
exactly.
where you think, lifestyle and things are quite affordable, and we have access to almost everything. We're fortunate like that. But third world countries or other countries who are already going through difficult times and are more severely affected by climate change are a lot more are suffering a lot more compared to us here, right?
Mm,
So
all right.
yeah.
So there's also a varying degree of life experiences or quality of life, for example. I think from what I can accept from what you've said is that in Brunei, we are not directly impacted by the effects of climate change, while in other countries, people would maybe feel it more directly because of how intense the effects of climate change there
Yeah.
in that area is. So yeah, that I think that's an interesting note, and I think for the next question that I would like to sort of like address here is, what do you think are the factors that could sort of like negate climate change, in based on your opinion and experience, Adina?
This is a very difficult question. I feel like it's like a chicken and egg situation, just because
Exactly.
there's so many things that we can do. Yeah. Um, Obviously, if you look at the biggest contributor, definitely comes from um, industries as well as transport, for example. Um, but if I would like to focus on, okay, obviously that will be managed by industries, organizations, or authorities. But if I really look at the circle of influence and the circle of control, I think that aside from that, the biggest needle mover would potentially be individuals or maybe younger generation, because you're making different choices. So different
Yes.
choices with your life, because that will reduce demand and eventually will reduce
Mm,
supply, and maybe will put pressure on making different processes or
mm. Yeah.
finding new technologies.
So just a question here again. I think to emphasize or to add on to what you've said, um, you're saying that individual action is imperative, especially for youths here in the current present day. But don't you think industries could also play a vital role, because they're the ones that are polluting mostly? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're also a big contributor towards exacerbating the effects of climate change currently.
Yeah, and I think there are regulations in place, as well as commitments, ambitions. So there are pressure from regulators on industries,
Hmm.
because obviously they are the ones that can afford and look into different ways to reduce or even eliminate emissions. But there are also demands, right? For example, electricity. If you don't reduce consumption, there will always be a demand for more electricity. For example, or fuel. You don't reduce fuel consumption, more people will demand for more fuel, and somebody has to provide for the people. At least that's my opinion.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a cycle as well. The industries exist for a reason, correct? And because it's feeding to the consumer needs, and I think it's a systematic problem as well that we need to sort of like look into and reassess if it's impertinent or not in the present day. So I guess from jumping off from that discussion, Adina, um, what do you think about how the world is right now in terms of it protecting the environment and it combating climate change currently? So those are really broad questions, but first thing that comes out to your mind.
I personally think, like, with the youth, I think we're going on the right track. I've seen a lot more awareness, a lot more actions, a lot more um, initiatives, especially in country, right, about raising
Yes,
awareness and making people more aware of what choices they can make.
exactly.
Um, Even on a country level, I think there's a lot of push to really seriously take action. And you probably have seen a lot more just recently, the climate change week,
Yeah. Oh,
and also net metering. Sorry, yeah, net
yeah,
metering. And there's a lot more other new um, choices and initiatives that
exactly.
has been shared in country. So I think we are going on the right track. Are we doing enough? I think we can do more. Um,
Definitely.
yeah, but there are still a few things I feel that needs to be ironed out. just because
Such as?
such as so for example, if I take Europe for example, right? They're well advanced like in terms of, I'm not sure if it's a good comparison or not. They're well advanced in terms of electric vehicles, as well as providing alternatives for the consumer. So, for example, plant-based
Plant-based.
options.
Okay,
Yeah,
plant-based
because
options.
that's also, yeah, there's also another way to kind of like encourage people to also look into their carbon footprint, but their diet.
Yeah,
Or electric vehicles, because there's a lot more electric vehicles, and I was a part of a car club that offers electric car vehicles. So I
wow.
just pay a monthly amount
Is
when
that Brunei, by the
monthly.
way?
No,
Oh,
no,
no, it's not.
it's not. It's not. So
During
I'm
your
just sharing
studies.
an example. Yeah,
Okay.
in Europe that you can pay for a car club,
Oh,
and they
that's
provide
interesting.
options for a hybrid or an electric car,
Hmm.
and that itself is making it really easy for one to reduce personal emissions, for example. But
Hmm.
yeah, so we're still getting there. um
So technology-wise, you think technology just needs time to catch up to fighting against climate change?
I think there's a lot more developments in terms of solar power,
Mm.
right? Renewables, because I think that there has been a lot of, I can't remember, in the like 5-6 years, there have been a lot of different talks around solar power, especially in Brunei, because of how much sun we
Okay.
we get. And we started off with, that was a solar farm in Tenaga Surya,
I
Syria.
think I saw that before. Yeah, that solar plant.
Yeah,
I think it was
yeah.
in the river, right? Something.
I don't remember how long it
No.
has been there, but it has been there for quite a while before
Mm.
Brunei started looking into more opportunities. So I think we're heading towards the right direction. Um, yeah,
Okay,
but we
just
can't really
to
compare with other countries.
yeah, just a curiosity right here. You've mentioned how important youth action is. You've mentioned how technology is important, specifically renewables, in this case, electric cars, based on your experience. What about the environment, Adina? The environment that we have currently, how important should we place a focus on it and in the fight against the effects of climate change?
When you say environment, are you talking about like
I'm talking
nature
about the
or?
forests that we have. I'm talking about um, the diversity that we have. For example, why is it important to protect them, and how is it important that we use them as a bulwark against the fight against climate change?
Yeah, I think definitely would be um, the natural carbon sinks, right? So we
Yeah,
do
natural.
have a lot of like big lands of peatlands, for example,
Yeah, yeah.
natural carbon sequestration, and there, if we protect it and just maintain it, I think
Mm.
that will help with CO2 emissions present in the atmosphere. But also, I know that a lot of people are really into tree planting,
Yeah, like
and
right now in Brunei, it's the craze. Everyone's planting
yeah,
trees. Yeah.
yeah, to meet the KPI. And I think, if I
What
remember
KPI for
correct,
what, basically?
KPI. Oh, there's a KPI based on the Brunei National Climate Change Policy.
Do you want to explain that to the
S-
audience?
yeah, so there is a target number of trees
Mm-hmm.
in for Brunei that they're trying to meet in order to um, increase or maintain the natural carbon sinks.
So this is an effort to make Brunei carbon neutral, correct?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. So basically, I think going back to your point there, everyone's sort of planting trees now to meet the carbon requirement in Brunei to make it carbon neutral.
Not just trees, there are so many. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the national climate change policy, but there are about, I think,
I've heard of it, yes.
I'm
But
sure
maybe
you have.
you wanna elaborate on it.
Yeah, there are a set of strategies on different efforts to try and take action to combat climate change. So one of it is definitely on um, I don't remember now on top of my head what it's called, but definitely one on tree planting because to increase the natural carbon sinks. There's one on industrial emissions, one on waste management. So there are a lot of different things that um, we're looking at as a country to work towards reducing carbon emissions from all the different contributors.
Interesting. So basically Brunei has sort of like a strategy already in terms of fighting against the effects of climate change here. And I think it's particularly important because Brunei is very much a coastal country. Everyone lives on the coastal regions, correct?
Hmm.
Yeah, so I think this sort of like strategy is in accordance to that. And I think what we've garnered from Adina right there, everyone, is that there's a holistic approach towards fighting against climate change right now in the world as well. And she discussed about youth, how important they are, since they're the ones that are leading the world in the future, as well as how technology is important in fighting against climate change as well. And lastly, how we need to protect our environment um, in order to preserve it, so that it can just fight against the effects of climate change and avoid any sort of like natural disasters that might happen because of climate change. And I think Adina, you touch upon all areas there, and I think hopefully the audience can sort of like accept something from that. But I would love to know your opinion here. Okay, so what do you think of the global community, Adina, in addressing the issue of climate change? Do you think the global community is doing enough, or is it still playing around here?
Have you heard of the Extinction Rebellion?
Yes, I think I've heard of it, but uh, maybe you can explain to everyone here what they are.
Yeah, so that I don't remember when they started off, but I am pretty sure they have started off in the last few years, and they have been quite vocal
Mm,
about um, what their objective and what their purpose is. Um, and I think there are a lot more people who are willing to stand and support or rather fight and really push forward the fight against
okay.
to really push forward and support like the fight against climate change.
So what I'm getting here is that they're really strong. Are they activists or advocates? Would you say?
So
And
this
what do
is where
they
I'm
do?
torn, right?
Mhm.
Because they're very loud
Loud.
in the sense that they are doing many different things. One of the news that I've read about them is holding protests in the city center, and I think that will definitely get the attention that they want and they need. But at the same time, like I'm not sure whether that is really grabbing the attention of the ones who really need to give them the attention.
Mm. Okay. So
Yeah, so I'm
basically,
really torn between their methods as well as what they are with their
mm,
purpose. So
but
I don't think there's a right or wrong in terms of the
okay.
um,
So I
different
mean,
methods.
so the Extinction Rebellion is just an organization, right? They're part of the global effort. But what do you think about the global community here? Uh, like the Paris Agreement that happened, um, the current sort of like efforts to stymie the effects of climate change. Do you think they're addressing the importance of climate change enough? And are they doing actions that are effective against it?
I think to some extent they are.
Uh-huh.
But of course, like I think it has to be a balance, right? It's not one or the other. It,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of things. Yeah, environment is one thing, but there's also other things that we need to consider as well. For example, livelihood, um, lifestyle, welfare. Um, I think that there are there needs to be a lot of consideration around what are we agreeing to and what are we um, what
Different effect to, or at least a less beneficial effect to another group of individuals. But don't you think protecting the environment is important right now,
oh
since
it is.
the world is closely coming to a stage where we can't reverse the effects of climate change?
Oh, definitely it is. I'm not saying that we shouldn't,
Okay,
definitely, but I also understand like some of the challenges that are faced by some of the nations, right? I'm not saying that they shouldn't continue to thrive towards doing that, but I'm just saying that I don't also understand there are some other implications and challenges.
I
So
think it's
to answer
understandable.
your question, I think we are doing something, and that's a positive thing. And of course, we just have to keep going. Um, but yeah, I think there will be a lot of other more clever people than me who will start looking into like how can we try to work around the challenges or find solutions.
Definitely, that's sound. All right, Alina. So, currently, what do you think are the most sort of like significant efforts in uh, solving these problems caused by climate change? And is this effort significant because importance of climate change is addressed at first hand?
Wow, it's kind of it's a little bit tricky to answer a question because if I look at it from I think a lot of the industries are doing something about it. Um, so, for example, emissions reductions, right? I am observing that there are a lot of pressure in trying to reduce emissions,
Yes,
especially for um, big corporations. And that is um, impactful, at least in my
exactly.
opinion. And in terms of alternatives, like you hear a lot more wind energies and renewables, especially I hear a lot more of that in Europe,
Yeah.
including as well. Brunei just recently introduced the net metering, where you can you can install solar panels at your homes and make use of the energy from that as well as return it to the grid. And that is something that I've seen a lot more in the past rolled out in Europe. So I think we're moving towards the right direction,
Mm,
and um,
exactly.
significance would definitely mean obviously from the biggest contributor, but I still think that all efforts from different angles will definitely help the bigger picture.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really true there, Adina. I think a significant indicator would be largely coming from those big corporations that have been emitting as much to sort of like that, sort of like exacerbate climate change in this case. And I think initiatives from them, especially I think what you've mentioned there just now is the net meter. That's already a good sign where the world is trying to move into stymieing the effects of climate change and environmental damage at the same time. Yeah, so okay, Adina, we're coming to sort of like uh, the later parts of the session here. So let me give you a scenario. If climate change is not addressed, Adina, as it has been currently, where do you think we will be, and what would happen?
I think we're gonna get to. I think we're gonna get to the worst case scenario faster,
Hmm.
at a faster rate than we are at the moment.
So basically, right now, you and I couldn't be talking if, for example, we're not intense in terms of trying to fight against climate change, correct? And
Mm.
what do you think the world would be like? I mean, yeah, chaos is one, but what will happen to the countries that we have currently?
The country that we're living in.
No, I mean like the countries. I'm talking more in a global sense. What will happen to
You'll
the
see.
global community? Yeah,
I'm pretty sure you'll hear. I mean, this is what I would think. We'll hear a lot more about crisis, water crisis, um, um, flooding, um, and you'll hear more about um, diseases because
diseases.
everybody will probably not. There will probably be challenges with access to clean water and um, really hot weather.
Pretty much. I think we're experiencing that right now.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that for sure.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, those are some of the things that are really bad news for us if it were to happen now. And I think the world tension would be much more uh, intense in this case if we don't address climate change or address the importance of knowing about climate change and its effects. So, how do you think, Adina, we can effectively address the problem of climate change to the masses? How can we not only make them aware of the effects of climate change and climate change in general, but also entice them to act against climate change, for example? How can we convince them to that extent?
So it really depends, right? Because if you're talking about the biggest contributor, um, I feel like the interest from the public, pressure from the authorities will definitely look into that. But to be honest, my personal opinion is more around personal choices.
Personal choices.
Just because, how many cars does a household have?
Well, in Brunei, I could say at least two.
Two
Yeah,
or more.
exactly.
And how many people actually carpool to work
Not a
or take
lot.
public transportation? So in the end, it's about personal choices, right? How many people? So we're talking about climate change, mostly around emissions, obviously, because it's the biggest contributor. But there are other things that can easily be reduced. I tell you a secret. I'm actually not a fan of these reusable bags that people would give
No,
away all the time.
the tote bags and whatnot. No.
Yeah, and not because definitely you need to reuse bags, and that's already a good idea because you're reducing plastics.
Yeah.
But the more reusable bags you give out in different sizes,
Okay.
it creates waste. And I'm trying to reduce my waste.
How does it
And
create
it
waste?
becomes
Just curious.
because you go to an you go to an event,
Uh huh.
you'll get a reusable bag, and then like wedding event or
Mm.
or you go to a shop and they'll give you another set of reusable
So it
bags,
just
right?
piles up in your home.
Yes.
Oh.
And then you have more than enough. And then so what do you do about it?
Yeah,
You give it
exactly. I
away to
think
other
that's a good
people.
point. Yeah.
So, but that is because I'm trying to reduce my own waste, and it becomes a problem for me because there's no other way that I can send it. No recycling centers will accept it. Um, and in the end, it's gonna be um, in
Just
the end, it's gonna go to landfill, right? Worst case
exactly.
scenario. So some of the ideas are good, but I feel like it's not exactly the solution.
Mm.
It's the same, in the end, like it's my personal choice to always make sure that I bring my own tumbler
Yeah.
so that I can reduce the plastic waste or any um, disposable cups that I use or straws, and making sure that I will tell
Mm.
the person that I don't want any straws with my drink.
Okay.
So
So
I
actually,
guess there are some things that we as an individual can play a part more.
mm,
I was reading an article recently about um, things that previously older generations would repair and just keep using. But I realized that I've done this before. Once it's broken or once it's torn, I'm just gonna
throw it
replace it
away.
with somebody. Yeah,
Yeah.
replace it with something new. So, you know,
Okay. Well, what I can garner from that sort of like conversation there, Adina, is that you're a really strong advocate for personal choice here. Don't you think the government of or the overseeing body should be the ones that facilitate or at least sort of like change the whole uh, basis in which we consume items on a daily basis that are just disposable by enacting policies and whatnot.
I don't remember where I read this, but did you know that plastic was introduced for convenience,
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yes, it
for
is very
our
convenient.
convenience, to make it easy? So it was a good innovation in the past, right? Oh,
Yeah.
so easy and convenient for us, but eventually it becomes a problem because we didn't really think about um, cradle to grave. Like we didn't really think about what I'm gonna do with it. So to answer your question, yes, of course, government have the resources, the authority, and government in general, yeah, have resources and
Yeah, yeah.
authority
That's what I meant.
to really introduce change, but at the same time, I still feel like it's an individual that could actually help to make a difference. So you can
So
look at it from both angle, right? The government can do something about it, and
yeah.
individuals be able to support it.
So it's not
But
only just
my challenge to you is,
it's
until
not only one
when
purpose.
should we wait for somebody to tell us that we need to stop or we need to find alternatives? Why can't it just be our own choice?
I mean, I would say that individual action would require a lot of time to create sort of like a mass action towards or against something that they know is something dangerous to them in the long run. But government action could expedite the process in a sense that uh, they could facilitate this process faster by them transitioning into sort of like a new habit, for example, not using plastics or products not using plastics in general, but it just
Oh yeah,
requires.
for sure. Like for example, if they're going to be like the recent plastic bans, right?
Mm.
That was introduced
That
by
was a good
the
initiative.
government.
Yeah.
And then they actually did it in phases. So starting off with a day, I believe, and eventually 2 day and 3 day weekends, and now every day no plastic, for sure. And I think it's the same as potentially not allowing any plastic materials to be available for anyone to use. Yeah, that definitely will help to deter
Exactly.
and really help um, to to expedite it. But I'm just wondering as well, right? When you have an option of plastic, so for example, you need to get plastic um, cups, disposable ones, and you have an option between paper ones or reusable ones and disposable ones, which are obviously more cheaper,
Yeah.
people would tend to go for the cheaper option.
Yes, yes, exactly.
So if we would like to change or make the alternative a more affordable and attractive option, then
So
it shouldn't be.
incentivize the
Yes.
environmentally friendly one. So basically, yeah,
Yes.
Dina, I think you've touched upon a good point. It's not only both actions are important, both from the individual and also the government to, help eventually convince the masses or the public to sort of like implement these habits or like environmentally friendly alternatives that could be of benefit in the fight against climate change. If one country does it, eventually everyone will. Yeah. So okay. Thank you, Adina, for that. And I think from that session we can garner a lot from Adina's sort of like personal opinion on climate change and her own views on some topics on climate change, for example, on the efforts against it, factors that could help the fight against climate change, and also how the global community is reacting to the fight against climate change and how they are addressing it. So I hope the audience, learns a bit from what we've sort of like discussed here, that the fight against climate change is not a single man's action. It's a holistic approach coming from not only just one country, one individual, but also it includes everything, the individual, their habits, their community, their country, their government, and also governments of the world at the end. So, if there's one thing that you would like to say to the audience, Adina, tonight after this session, what would you say?
Make better choices.
Make better
Make
choices.
better personal choices. Yeah.
Make better
I
personal
feel
choices.
I feel I feel like the more people, individually, um obviously, together the voice will be louder,
Yes,
but at the same time, if everybody just play a small part, I think we're off to a good start. Better.
exactly. And I think that's a sound proposition for, starting to advocate and fight against what we think is affecting our world in a badly manner. So thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. I think we've learned a lot about how important it is in addressing and getting the message out there in the fight against climate change, especially from our invited speaker here, Adina. So I think from what we garnered from the discussion, it is an important step. Uh, Addressing is an important step in the effort to ensure that the earth that we're living in today prolongs in its longevity and lives longer for future generations to live on. So with that, thank you everyone for tuning in. Bye bye.